Good morning, GMGM. Thank you, everybody here, for choosing to spend your time at our third inaugural NoirCon.
Randomness and zero-knowledge proofs. So today we'll cover what is randomness and why it's a bit tricky when it comes up, in ZKPs. So first things first, what is randomness? So if you open a dictionary, randomness is the quality of being random. Thank you. Okay, granted, they refine it a tiny bit. The quality of being random, happening, done, or chosen by chance rather than according to a plan. That doesn't really sound like the randomness we're used to in computer sciences, right? You can find other definitions, like the Oxford language one that says it's the quality or state of lacking a pattern or principle of organization and predictability. And this one is more, is closer to what we mean when we're talking about randomness in computer sciences. That word, unpredictability in particular, will come up later and is quite important. So now I can ask you all, is this random? Well, if you look at it and you squint a little bit, you'll be like, nah, Yolan, this is not random. No way. And then you look at the second one and you're like, that looks random, Could be random, feels random. And then you look at the next one and you're like, nah, not random neither. The next one also, again, looks random, but actually if you look at the hexadecimal representation, that doesn't look random anymore, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So, ish. And then the last one definitely doesn't look random, right? And yet, all of these things, all of these bit strings have the same probability of happening at random in a random draw of that size. Here I think we got like 37 characters displayed or something. The chance of getting any of these 5 values is the exact same for all of them. So we do have a sense, a notion, I guess, of randomness as human beings, and that has actually been properly defined through the Kolmogorov complexity. So Kolmogorov complexity basically tells you something will look random if you struggle to compress it. And it makes a lot of sense if you think about it. The ones that did not look random, you could describe them, with fewer sentences, without saying all the numbers. Whereas the ones that were properly random, you would have to spell them out, bit by bit to actually convey the final value. But so let's come back to the initial question, okay? What is randomness? Well, it turns out there are flavors of randomness. There are different kinds of randomness. If you're generating a secret key to all of your Bitcoins or Ethereums or whatsoever, you want to use secret randomness, something that is private, that only you know, right? That is probably generated on a device you trust, maybe a hardware wallet, maybe your own computer, something like that, right? However, if you're running a lottery and somebody is gonna tell you who's winning, you don't really want to trust them. Maybe they pick the number so that their friend is winning. So in the case of public randomness, when, for casinos, lotteries, a lot of on-chain smart contract thingies, you kinda don't want to trust anybody and you would like to see the public randomness being properly random. In the real world, what they do is they pick the numbers, using balls, in a big jar on TV to prove they're not cheating in the lotteries. It's a bit trickier when it comes, when we're trying to do it on-chain. And that's when the notion of verifiable randomness comes in. So remember the title of my talk, right? Public verifiable randomness. So public randomness is real cool because we can do lotteries, casinos, that kind of stuff. But since you don't want to trust anybody, you really want the public auditability of it to be a thing. And that's when verifiable randomness comes in, and it's basically a way of verifying that some random value has been properly generated. Properly generated means it's unpredictable and unbiased, usually. How does that work? Well, using cool, complex cryptography. We'll see some later. And why do we even need randomness? Well, turns out we need randomness for lots of stuff. So I mentioned lotteries already. In general, for sortations, when you want to pick people at random or something like that, jury selection, leader election, that kind of stuff, you kind of want randomness. So it's unbiased and unpredictable. Same for lots of protocols in cryptography, right? For signature schemes, you need nonces. For gossiping, you want to randomly choose the peers you'll be gossiping to so that it disseminates uniformly in the network, and so on and so on. Even for stuff like medical trials, you kind of want randomness. And people have actually shown recently that if you just take bad randomness for simulations, your simulation won't be that good. So you actually need really good randomness to do good simulation of real-world stuff like physics and so on. Anyhow, other reasons to want public verifiable randomness. When a random investigation targets two people that are closely related, people will be like, that doesn't look random, right? Another reason, consensus algorithm have leader election typically to choose who's going to mine the next block or who's going to choose the next transactions. Everybody does it in a different way. So for example, Filecoin has a leader election that uses a random beacon I'll be talking about a bit later, the rand, whereas Ethereum has a random beacon called Randamu that allows a committee of 128 nodes in the Ethereum network to choose the next random value for leader election-ish. So I mentioned earlier we wanted unpredictability and bias resistance when it comes to randomness, and it's quite important. And the question is, why do we need them? So unpredictability probably is obvious, so that people cannot cheat. If I'm able to predict who's going to win the lottery, what's the winning number, for example, or something like that, I could tell my friends, and they could cheat. Nobody wants that. Same if you're in the Filecoin network and you don't want to waste resources, you could turn off your storage provider machine until you know you'll be elected and will need to do some work. So you could not be available, not participate in the network until you need to prove you're actually participating, and that would be cheating as well. Why unbiased? So this one is a bit trickier. I mentioned earlier that biased Montgomery simulations can lead to like bad outcomes in simulations of physics and stuff like that. In general, for cryptographic purposes, a small nonce bias can lead to complete key recovery. So when you're signing a transaction on Ethereum or Bitcoin, you'll be using the ECDSA signature scheme. The ECDSA signature scheme is very, very sensitive to bias in the nonces. It's been shown that having less than 1 bit of bias, so only maybe every 3 signatures is slightly biased or something like that, can actually lead to key recovery, which is pretty crazy. And ECDSA is very close to Schnorr signatures, so it is the same for all Schnorr-like signatures. ECDSA, EDDSA, all of them are very sensitive to bias. And it actually happened. So people have lost Bitcoins because their nonces were not properly random. And that was a long time ago, you'll tell me, 2013, right? Well, guess what? It kept happening. People have been generating signatures with slight bias in the randomness they were using, which led to private key recovery. So that paper by Joachim and Nadia showed actually that all the addresses on-chain that were vulnerable to nonce bias were actually already empty. So it's unclear who's emptied them, but there's definitely people watching for bias on-chain. So be careful with bias. Maybe you're wondering, what do I mean when I'm talking about bias? So a very obvious bias, and I'm sorry, this is not Noir code, and this is not Rust-like. I love Go, so that's some Go code. Is when you try to generate a random integer. Let's say you want a random integer smaller than 107. So you could pick a random byte. This is very easy to do in most languages. You have a rand.read or something like that in all languages that allows you to read a single random byte usually coming from syscalls on your machine or from your CPU, even though some are biased sometimes. But you would read a byte, right? And you'd think, oh, do I make it smaller than 107? Well, I can just reduce it modulo 107, right? And it will be smaller than 107. Nope. These will actually bias your value in a very noticeable way. And that's the kind of bias we're talking about when we do that. Because 256 possible values for 1 byte do not map perfectly to 107, meaning you have 2 times 107 in 256 plus 42 possible values. And these 42 possible values will mean you will be a much heavier start of your distribution here. And this is not great. And that can lead to lost bitcoins and so on and so on. So we usually want to avoid that. A way to avoid that is to actually do rejection sampling or using very large values before doing a modular rejection. There is a blog post I've written about it like 7 years ago online. You can check it out. It's a thing. Anyway, that was all for secret or local randomness on your machine when you're reading from your PRNG 1 byte and trying to get a value out of it. How does it work? In the decentralized case, Alder. Well, a very old idea for public randomness was to create these so-called randomness beacons. You can think of it like a lighthouse, that has a light on the top. These beacons would be like emitting randomness every now and then for anybody to use whenever they want. And that idea is actually due to Michael Rabin in 1993, so it's been around for a while, and turns out, till 6 years ago, there weren't many options out there to do that. One option was to trust NIST, which is running a random beacon, except people usually don't want any single trusted party, especially not NIST, because NIST is the standardization body in the US, has been known to actually try and bias randomness in cryptographic schemes in the past. Look up the dual ECD-RBG scandal out online, and you'll see that they were nasty, really trying to bias randomness there. So what happened is that 6 years ago, with Cloudflare, Ethereum Foundations, and a couple of other people, we launched a DRAM network called the League of Entropy that is meant to be just, there to provide public verifiable randomness for anybody to use. And that thing has been ticking since then, flawlessly, and is actually providing the randomness used by Filecoin for leader election. And so the DRAM properties are all the nice ones we might want to have for something like public randomness, except it's decentralized. So it's unpredictable, it's bias resistant, and it's verifiable. And that last word is super important because that's where it becomes interesting for us. So anybody can grab randomness online from DRAM. It's there, it's free, it's a public good. And the entropy itself is actually coming from all the organizations running these DRAM nodes together. I mentioned Cloudflare is one of them. So for example, Cloudflare is using their wall of lava lamps to seed the randomness used in DRAM to guarantee nobody can predict the next number, stuff like that. So I mentioned that verifiability property multiple times now. And that's because public randomness is cool, but we don't want to trust anybody. We're not in a, hey, trust me, bro, here is a random number kind of case. We're in a, hey, show me, the deeds, what's going on here. And DRAM is achieving that through signature verification using pairings. And I'm sorry, you'll be asking me now, hey, you've been talking for 20 minutes, we're the ZK. Yeah, we're at NoirCon, right? Well, it turns out that first things first, I need to explain what is a pairing and how the signature verification using pairings work. So a pairing is a bilinear function from 2 groups, G1 and G2, onto a target group, GT. Typically, G2 is like an extension field of G1 of degree 2, and GT will be an extension field of degree 12 of G1 as well. The problem here is that these fields are typically big. So I mentioned G2 is an extension field of degree 2 of G1. So typically G1 is 254 bits or 381 bit field sizes, meaning the 12th extension is ginormous, and that is not great to do in ZK, right? So signature verification using pairings is fairly easy. You take a signature pi, you take the message you want to verify, you sign it by just multiplying the message with your secret and producing the pairing and producing that value out there saying, hey, that's my signature. The discrete logarithm problem guarantees us it's difficult to go from that multiplication back to the initial value S, that is your secret. And when you want to verify, you take the public key, which is simply your secrets times the generator of the curve, G1. So SG1 here is your public key. And magically, if you compute the pairing of G1, the generator on G1, together with the signature pi, you got the pairing of G1 and S times the message, which is equal by bilinearity to S times the pairing of G1 and M. Now, if you do the same computation using the public key and the message, without knowing the secret key this time, you compute the pairing of the public key S times G1 together with the message M. And that pairing SG1 with M is actually by bilinearity, again, equal to the same value S times the pairing of G1 and M. So we have basically two very different ways of computing the same value. One time we need, in both cases, we need to know the secret key to generate the signatures pi and the public key. But as a receiver of the signature pi, I can verify everything works just using the public key very easily. And that's exactly how DRAN works, actually. At each epoch, it will tick, like a clock, and it will take the round number it's currently at, we'll map it to the elliptic curve we're using, and we'll sign that using a threshold signature scheme so that the whole network participates, and it cannot be biased nor predicted before the time has come. And then this final signature is aggregated using Lagrange interpolation, which is all right, and give us a signature pi. That's just like classical threshold signatures, not really the topic today. And so now, let's come back to ZKs, right? How do we do to get randomness in Noir? Well, you don't generate randomness, right? You don't have a standard library function that tells, hey, random get number, give me a random number. That doesn't exist. Circuits are inherently deterministic, right? So one way that people typically do it is by using a commit reveal scheme, where you would commit to some value ahead of time and then reveal it afterwards. Or maybe if you're two people, one of them would commit to a value, the other, and it would be like a multi-hop protocol. It's a bit annoying, not always great. But you have ways to verify that the committed value is really the one that has been revealed at the really matches the one that has been revealed at the end, yada yada, by just rehashing it in ZK. That would work. It's not very practical. Instead, if you use something like DRAND and verifiable randomness, what you could do is you could take 3 public values. These are all public values, so you don't need to care too much about the private side of things here. And you can verify that the signature is valid, and then because of the way signature schemes work, that it could not be predicted and could not be biased, because a signature in a secure signature scheme is always uniformly distributed in the space of all possible signatures. And so what you do next to verify the randomness is just verify the signature you got from the network, and then hash that value so that you get something that maps to bits. Because I mentioned the space of possible signatures, which is on an elliptic curve, so you can't use that directly as bits. You need to map it to the possible bit strings you might want to use. And that, works well. Works also in EVM, works for most decentralized stuff out there, because it's all public values, very easy to do, right? Well, I mentioned the base fields of the curves we're typically using for pairings is very large. So having to do arithmetic on 381-bit field elements is not quick. And you might know, recently in Noir we got the big integer library that was the Noir Big Num library that was added and provides support for such large field arithmetic, and so it is nowadays possible to do pairing verification in Noir somewhat easily. So if you look it up, there are libraries out there to do pairing in Noir. I mean, look at these circuit sizes, right? This is not the fastest things out there. But it's doable, it works, you could do it. So yeah, now I guess it's time for trying to think about other solutions to do verifiable randomness in Noir. So how do we do to make it faster, better, and so on? One way of doing that would be to use application-specific curves in which you can embed the curve you use for your ZK system embeds the curve we use for the different signatures. So this has been done, for example, for the ZK time lock project by Timothy, where he's trying to do time lock encryption using the same technology as DRAND, and in ZK prove that what has been encrypted is really something you're interested in. Anyway, that allows you to have good performances. Another way of doing it is to switch to curves like BLS 12377, on which Zcash have been doing a lot of work, and that one can be embedded into another curve called BW6 761, and that means your arithmetic gets faster because you're, basically a subset of the curve you're working with for your ZK system. But these are not great because they require changes to the existing DRAND protocol. So it could be doable, but it's not great. And so in the meantime, we have no choice but to do native arithmetic in 381-bit fields. So I guess my plea for you, Noir folks, I don't know if there are any Noir devs in the room, but yeah, there is a cool BN254 field library in Noir already, except it's very limited right now. It'd be really cool to see that library being extended to support more curves, maybe like BLS 12381, and also provide convenient functions like hash to curve and pairing verification directly, in the language. It could be also added as a black box function, I guess. This is all operating on public values anyway, so. Yeah, and so thank you very much. I think we still have like 3-4 minutes for questions. If you're curious about the project, you can head to DRAND.love or check out our GitHub. So DRAND has been running as a public good for the past 6 years. We'll keep running, so you can use it for your public verifiable randomness needs. Next time you do a lottery, for example, it was used last year for doing a raffle for Devconnect. Devcon tickets in Thailand on-chain, on a Ethereum chain. But yeah, basically, I hope you learned something today about randomness and decentralized verifiable randomness. And I'll be around if you want to talk to me about threshold signatures or, yeah, that kind of tech. Awesome. Any questions? Yeah.
Which chains are you on for being able to verify the randomness? I think you guys are on base. Are you guys on Arbitrum and Aztec as well? Or?
I'm not sure I understood the question. With based on Arbitrum?
Yeah.
So.
I've checked. Isn't there also a verifier contract for the randomness?
Oh yeah, definitely. So in EVM land, it's fairly easy to verify BN254 pairings. There is a precompile for it. And since the Pectra upgrade of Ethereum, there is also precompiles for BLS 12381. And so we have code on GitHub to verify in Solidity, in EVM land, signatures produced by DRAND. And if you check the blog, I think the last blog post was about exactly that, using the new precompiles. And yeah, so for EVM stuff, it's very easy to verify. For other blockchains like Sui, for example, or Aptos, they also have some convenient functions to do BLS in MOV, so that works well too. So yeah, it's fairly like trust chain compatible on that side, on that front. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much.